Welcome to Defen, episode number 34. And I think this is the third episode that we're trying to do live. And this time we have Mike Thompson all the way from Australia and future on the show. Welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thank you very much.
And there is also the other guy on the podcast. Can you please introduce yourself, sir?
What? Who's that? Who's that? Well, it's Raymondo here, and I've got my son in the background as the kind of usual distraction for the video people who, rather than looking at our horrible faces, is kind of they can watch the gaming guy in the background.
Yeah. So.
Right. Anyway,
let's get started. So, Mike, finally, we figured out some of the technical stuff that you're using. Somehow things work differently in Australia than here. But at least we are live now, and we're recording.
We're live.
So, let's talk about stuff now. First of all, Ray, you're talking about the Holy Trinity, right?
Well, I figured it was Sunday, so let's start like that. Yeah, the Holy Trinity. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if I've kind of lost my my motivation to speak about it now, but what the hell, we'll give it a try. So I was going to say that there's sort of the Holy Trinity is like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and a lot of the stuff we're doing in kind of ClojureScript server side things is obviously mixing all of these things together because that's what React does, and we're sitting on top of that. But there's a lot of blah 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 in the community about whether or not all of these things belong together, whether we should be doing these spars. And I was trying to frame some of the discussion around whether or not we should think about spars, or we should just like forget it and just say, okay, we're doing spars, single page applications, so let's just move on. So I think we can just edit all of this out, to be honest, because I don't think anyone really gives a shit. So I don't want to talk about it anymore. Sorry. We can talk. Let's talk. Because I use reframe, so let's talk about that instead. I use reframe, and I think it's pretty good. So that's why we've got Mike on. So let's just dive into that instead.
Good. I know about that stuff. I'm not sure about the other stuff. No strong opinions really.
Yeah. Okay.
So how did you get into reframe, or how did you make that one? Or maybe we need some historical context, because there is a lot of good stuff coming out of Australia. So especially from you guys, you and Dan and everything. Oh, before we get that, I mean, I saw a comment on Reddit. Somebody said Dan and Mike are the nicest MFers. I mean, I can't say that, but I think he meant in a nicest way. So they were very excited that you're going to be on this episode.
Very nice of them. We do our best.
So just give us some introduction. How did you get into Clojure, and then we'll get deeper into reframe.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess we got into Clojure. We've really got into ClojureScript. We're really a ClojureScript sort of a shop more than a Clojure shop. And we do slightly unusual software. We're a company of about sort of 6, and we do optimization work. And our software tends to sit on the side of another main reference system at our clients, and we do a bit of premium optimization work, and then we send some information back. So we don't do a lot of traditional web server related stuff. What we do is we have to gather a lot of complicated information from our users. Then we send it off to a back-end cluster of machines which do a whole lot of number crunching on it, and then we get an answer back, and we need to display a pretty sort of result, sometimes a complicated result for the user to have a bit of a look at. So we're not your traditional shop where we're kind of doing a relatively thin veneer at the front over a database at the back end. So we're slightly different in that sort of regard. So we were using, probably starting in about 2004, 2005, we were using Flex or Flash sort of to do our front ends. And of course, that was a really sophisticated environment. I still curse the day that sort of, that's died really, but sort of that was a very sophisticated environment at a time when everybody else was using IE6. We're
Yeah.
in this absolutely marvelous world of Flash where we had full animations and we had, beautifully rendered fonts and sort of, that we're in this lovely, in those days they called them rich internet applications. That was Adobe's
Yeah,
term
Yep.
for
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yep.
So, and incredibly sophisticated stuff. So I really cursed the day that it became apparent that Flash was sort of like just not going anywhere further. So I then started looking around for, well, what are we going to do next? And there weren't that many possibilities at that time. At that time, there was JavaScript. And, this is that horrible version of JavaScript which existed at one time. I know these days it's got lots of new features in it which make it much better.
Yeah.
But it was we looked around. There was CoffeeScript was actually a genuine alternative at that time, and the other
Yeah.
alternative was Dart. I had a good long look
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
Dart at one stage because that had Gillard Brasher in it, and that's someone that kind of I was familiar with from the Smalltalk days.
Mm.
So sort of had a good look at all of that, and in the end, probably came around quite like the idea of ClojureScript. That was a kind of a really unusual left of field sort of choice, but we're holding off, and then suddenly React hit. And I saw Reagent, and I went, "Oh, okay, that's it. We're going to go that way." So it was. I remember looking at ClojureScript and somebody was using ClojureScript to program Angular, for example, and I
Yeah.
was just there.
Yeah.
God, that just looks like the worst of all worlds to me. Here you are off in this small side technology called sort of ClojureScript at that time, and you're trying to use a JavaScript framework, and it just looked an absolute mess. And then suddenly React was there, and suddenly there was Reagent over the top of it, and yeah, we were good to go. We kind of pulled the trigger, and that was early 2014, I think. And
Yeah.
after a bit of a search to try and find kind of what we wanted to do. Now, of course, there's lots of options. There's TypeScript and there's all the rest. But back then, there weren't really that many options, and I just didn't want to do JavaScript. It just looked too painful.
But it seems like I remember some of the stuff from Flash and Flex a long time ago, and
Mm,
it seems like a bit of a apples to oranges comparison with ClojureScript, isn't it? Because Flash was more what was it called again?
Action
ActionScript or
script,
something?
action
Yeah,
script.
exactly.
Yeah.
So it was ActionScript, and Flex came later as a UI toolkit and everything. So
And
it was much more like fully packaged.
we use Flex. So
Yeah,
I mean, the brilliant thing about Flex was you just got instantly good-looking applications. Like there was
yeah,
no
yeah,
styling concerns. At a time when this is before Bootstrap came along, right? So
yeah,
Bootstrap
yeah,
has given a generation of people and programmers an easy sort of a look and feel, right?
Mm.
Well,
Mm.
with Flex, you got an instantly, really very good look and feel, and we did a lot of complicated stuff in Flash, and it worked very well for us. We've still got some systems, running in Flash, and
yeah.
soon they'll stop working because Chrome is going to, withdraw support and all of that. But they're still pretty nice looking applications, and they were possible to do in Flash. They were just impossible to do in the other web technologies at that time.
I think it was obviously Apple that killed it, wasn't it, with the iPhone and the iPad and stuff like that. So
Yeah, yeah.
because it
Well,
was a very nice portable desktop environment, like you say.
exactly. It commodified. Yeah. The reason why Jobs didn't like it, he wrote a 3,000 word essay ranting against Flash, and
Yeah.
Steve Jobs never wrote 3,000 word essays for any reason. He didn't have to write a 3,000 word essay when he got rid of the floppy disk, for example. Everyone just
Yeah.
nodded, right? So
Yeah.
he did that for his own reasons because Flash represented a um, a commoditizing type of a platform that meant that he couldn't really have an Apple store. So you can totally understand why he did it. There's an awful lot of people around who, will sort of say he was doing it for altruistic purposes and all the rest of it. No, he wasn't. But anyway, yeah, he
Yeah.
successfully killed it. But there was a lot of it had lots of security problems, and because it was really developed pre-security awareness, really. So in those early days, and I think it was all just too much to get
Yeah.
fixed.
Yeah, I mean the other complaint was that it was a CPU hog. That was his big complaint. That's what he crucified it on, wasn't it? Whether that's like actually true or not is open to debate, but that was the
Yeah,
kind of like central thesis that
yeah.
it just killed the computer, especially the mobile computer batteries and stuff like this.
Yeah, well, I must admit, I find Chrome kills my extremely powerful laptop. The next laptop I'm getting is going to have 32 gigs of RAM. I've currently got 16, and it isn't enough
Yeah.
because of
And
Chrome.
that seems like a very interesting comment that he made, that is going to kill CPU, and then we run Slack, and that's going to take, I don't know, fucking 20 gigabytes of RAM, and then it needs a cloud to run,
Yeah,
cluster to run,
yeah,
just to have a chat application.
yeah,
Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
things are getting
we
so much
can learn
better.
about this shit later.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Obviously,
CSS grid is going to save us all.
yeah.
Yeah.
But compared to ActionScript, because ActionScript, if I remember correctly, it's so long ago, and I used to do that crap on Macromedia days as well a bit before Adobe acquired them. ActionScript is much more object oriented, right? And then you see the rest of the things as there is a fundamental shift in the languages these days. So how do you feel the difference between ActionScript days and now ClojureScript?
Oh, it's just a completely different paradigm.
Yeah.
It's a completely different way of developing applications. I mean, we're with ActionScript, we would have an event backbone, and so everything was
Yeah.
sort of subscribed to the events, and you would produce events, and then there are all of these things listening for effectively what were state changes, or and everything. You had what it's like, object-oriented systems. There's state everywhere, and
Yeah.
it's all got to stay connected in some way. So everything's got to be listening to events, and then sort of knowing how to update themselves was kind of dividing up the behavior and the responsibility. But sort of I love what we've got these days. I really do. I feel like I've been developing UIs for 35 years, and really I feel like what we've got at the moment is as good as it's ever been. And I've developed in Smalltalk, albeit for not a huge amount of time, but I've seen all the best of the systems, and it really does feel at the moment the combination of Figwheel and CLJ Dev Tools and ClojureScript and React and Reagent and Reframe also. It feels very good. But we do slightly unusual applications, in the sense that ours are very SPA-ish. We don't talk to a server very often. We might talk to a
Yeah.
server once, and then 15 minutes later we might talk to the server again. And in the meantime, the application has done an awful lot just in its head without talking to the server. So I'm very aware that our applications are quite different to a lot of common applications where the application the client is a thin layer, a thin veneer over the top of a remote database.
Yeah.
So I'm very mindful we're different. I think that's why I developed Reframe the way that I did, because of our bias in that way.
Maybe we should just because we sometimes get like complaints about not introducing the tools properly that we're talking about. So like you say, Reframe is the thing that you're famous for. So we're definitely going to talk about that. But famous, yeah.
You're extremely famous.
For some measure of fame.
Yes.
No, you're extremely famous on this hemisphere. I mean, you should come here. I mean, people have this huge statues of you everywhere, and
No, I stay down here because no one knows me. I just would hate all that fame up there.
Yeah, you can walk on the streets without being mobbed.
Yeah, without being exactly.
Exactly that, and we genuflect towards Perth every morning and evening, and we say our prayers and everything. But please tell us how did Reframe come into the picture?
Well, more about what's the 10,000-foot view of Reframe? Like, what's its purpose, and what are we kind of trying to achieve with Reframe?
Okay. Well, I was saying before, we first of all we decided on ClojureScript, but couldn't quite commit because we saw ClojureScript being used by people who were using Angular, for example, and then all of a sudden there was Reagent, and at the same time, at almost coincident time, there was OM, and the two of those suddenly hit as layers over the top of Reagent, over the top of React. And so I like Reagent, and And at the time, we knew though we just needed more, right? Like we could see that what reagent was, but we also knew, in a traditional SPA, you need a proper MVC type of framework in an object-oriented world, right? So we knew that it was just a view side of things. So we needed all the rest of where does the control logic go? Where does the how to all the wiring in the back end behind all the views. So that's really what reframe does. It just provides architecture, sort of all the architecture that happens behind the views. Um, yeah. So it was just what we needed. We needed it for ourselves. We needed it for rather complicated applications. I mean, we've got full pivot tables that we've written, and we've got scatter plots where you can scoop up points and put them in buckets and all that sort of stuff. So we write complicated front end stuff, and we needed a proper framework to do that sort of to handle all of that, And like I said, going back to the server very infrequently, and that's what reframe was.
So just a quickie on that one. I mean, because all those kind of scatter plots and all those visualizations traditionally in JavaScript have been done using D3. So
yes.
What's do you use that, or is that?
We have swapped across to using Vega. We use Vega Lite or Vega, and it's excellent. Like, I really would recommend it to anyone. There's good reagent bindings for it. There's good bindings for like RAM as well. As far as and so
what is Vega? Is it just a complete rewrite of that visualization?
No, D3 is underneath Vega, but it's out of the Interactive Data Labs IDL, I think it is. Same place. Have you ever heard of Tableau?
Yeah.
So sort of, I think I'm going to get some of this detail wrong, but this is approximately right. The Interactive Data Labs or whatever used to be at somewhere like Berkeley or Stanford or something, and a group spun out of there and formed Tableau, and they retained strong relationships to this day, as I understand it. They've moved universities now, though, to another university, but they've come up with this grammar of visualizations, and it's terrific. Like, you can do all of your basic plots and scatter plots and all the rest of it, but like one or two of the things that we've done recently are really sophisticated, and like honestly they'd just be a huge amount of work, and you've got to spend a good 2 or 3 days learning Vega especially is it can be as complicated as you like, really, but once you've learned it, it's one of those Swiss Army knives that I reckon we'll be using for a long time to come. Always look for Swiss Army knife technologies. They do a lot of stuff for you.
But for the reframe, why specifically reagent? Because I remember I think the first one was Om, right? That linked React, or that used React.
Yeah.
And then we had RAM, we have Quiescent or something, and then we have many different types of things.
Yeah.
So what is the reason why you picked reagent to build the framework around?
Well, 2004, I think, I hope I get my dates right here, but in about mid-2003, I think React came out. And then suddenly, at the beginning of 2004, like December, January, around Christmas of that swap over between 2003 and 2004, we suddenly got 3 frameworks, which were Om, Quiescent, and Reagent. They all came out very close to one another in terms of time. And
I think it's like 2013 and 14, I think.
Yeah.
Just on that cusp, I think.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I hope I'm remembering
that. 2003.
Oh, did I? Sorry.
Yeah.
No, the cusp of 2013, 2014. You got those 3 all at once. And so that was the choice. That was the choice I was faced with. So I didn't like Om, and it was a very difficult time because, like, here I was swapping across into the functional world, and I was feeling quite unsure about what was good and what wasn't, and everyone was into Om, and so it was a slightly harrowing time actually for me, because I was sitting there going, I don't like this cursor approach. I can't organize my data in a tree the way that Om wants me to do it. And I felt, whereas I looked at reagent and I went, no, that's the way I want to do things. And yet everybody else who seemed to know what they were talking about was across on Om. And initially reagent got very, very little traction. And and yeah, like I said, I would keep on running back to Om and going, okay, I'm missing something. I haven't got this. I'm missing something. And in the end, I slowly convinced myself that I wasn't. And so we went with, it was mostly the cursors. I didn't like that concept at all because I felt that in a more complicated application, the actions that like cursors are good for CRUD type of activity, updates but the moment you get more sophisticated kind of intent from the user, it's not a simple data update most of the time. There's logic that normally hangs in every time a user clicks a button. There's more than just a data update. There's complicated logic that normally has to happen. So it just never felt quite right for us. So anyway, so we got stuck into reagent, but realized we didn't have the framework that we needed. So started working on that. And so I think by the end of about 2014, just at the end of 2014, I started writing up what reframe would be. And like I said, it was I think my brain at the time felt like a washing machine because there were so many new concepts. There's so many new concepts that sort of I felt like I was getting hit with. I looked into Pedestal
Yeah.
app,
Yeah.
the front end, which was kind of that was all new. There was also Hoplon,
Yes.
and I was pretty intrigued by the whole FRP side of that, and
the spreadsheet stuff.
yeah. So, and there was also Elm, which was happening. Like there were these. The moment I saw Hoplon, it started talking about FRP. I followed through FRP, ended up looking at some games because Elm at that time was mostly about games. And later on, the Elm architecture came along at pretty much the same time as Reframe came out. The two of them sort of came out coincidentally with each other, but there were a lot of good ideas in what I saw. Like so, Hoplon and Elm were quite influential. Om was some of I think David Nolan's more advanced tutorial. I remember reading that, and a penny dropped for me about the way that I kind of wanted Reframe to be. So I don't know. There was lots and lots of influences, and it's all just a washing machine, really. I was I was just hanging on to a log and trying to stay afloat there for a little while.
Well, what do you think the fundamentals of like FRP? Maybe as we go into what FRP is and what you liked about it.
Oh, okay.
It's like functional reactive programming.
Yeah. It appealed to me because that concept that whole React concept that the user interface is simply a rendering of your state, your application state, and the transfer, the successive derived views of the data in app state all the way through to a UI getting rendered. That's obviously fundamental to React, but it just seemed like that whole dominoes effect and FRP seemed to fit into that. I don't have a neat explanation for why it appealed, but it was just part of the washing machine that was going on at that time, and it seemed there's something very right about it, and also Reagent had built into it this notion of reactions, and kind of contexts in which if something changed, the context would reevaluate, and which was very FRP-ish. So suddenly we had the right tool, tool to use. The right technology to implement FRP. It was right there in Reagent. So it was just the right few ideas coming together with some existing technology and I wouldn't do it the same way if I was doing it again now, but at the time that felt pretty good, and it's worked pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about FRP to me is it's a little bit like these like some of the functional technology in general, that it all seemed a little bit impractical, 20 years ago. But suddenly with all these like advances where React has this sort of DOM diff thing, these algorithms that make all of that kind of stuff very efficient, you can suddenly focus on the kind of expressivity of your application rather than the mechanics of this update. It seems like they were giving us a real gift there, a bit like I don't know.
Yeah, Look, if you look at reframe, there's really two parts to it, right? There's the how do we make stuff happen? There's the users just clicked a button, and we
Yeah.
now need to figure out what's happening. And then there's all of this infrastructure that once we've figured out how the world should change as a result of that button getting pressed, there's the infrastructure associated with re-rendering the changed world for the user to have a look at. And it's just that boom, 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 that lovely sort of one thing leads to another. Everything's there's something about that. I still can't put my finger on it. Exactly why it's just so pleasing. But having done like UIs for like 3.5 decades,
Yeah.
there's something deeply pleasing about it that just brings a smile to my face. It just works really well. I'd love one of these days to understand why exactly that is, but it's just so perfect.
So the data flow stuff, because you're talking about, there are two parts to reframe. One is the rendering thing, and the other one. So I remember this whole one directional data flow stuff, or
Yeah.
one directional thing was coming from OM, I think, or at least the React kind of thinking. So can you give us some idea about how does this thing work? Like what exactly is unidirectional flow? Because there were some concepts, these things in I remember reading from Pedestal as well. Like they had also similar kind of concepts. So what exactly we mean by unidirectional data flow?
Okay, well, I guess unidirectional data flow means that, actually, during the Flex days, I had some experience with bindings. Because Flex allows you to have two-way bindings between a piece of state and something on screen. And so, if the tick box is ticked, then suddenly the piece of state or the Boolean which represents whether the state is ticked or not suddenly flicks on. And if you programmatically change that Boolean to a different value, then the tick box on the screen suddenly stops. Now that's a classic case of two-way binding, right? Because you've got the state affecting the UI, and if somebody changes the UI, then suddenly the state changes. So that's a classic case of two-way binding. And for the small demo apps, that looked really good. Like I still remember the Flex demo apps that looked fantastic. The number of lines of code you didn't need to write because all of that was just given to you. The moment you got out of nappies with that sort of stuff and started to build slightly bigger systems, that was a catastrophe, right? And that's because the way that all the state got updated was non-deterministic. This could happen this time, it might happen, this tick button might happen before, or this tick box state might change before this other thing over here, and it was just it was horrible. Very quickly it got horrible. And so I knew that two-way binding, which is why I was anti-cursors, right? Because that felt like two-way binding because of the Flash sort of experience. So the unidirectional flow, that was really Flux, which was one of the precursors to, or the Facebook guys talked a lot about unidirectional. I think that's where I picked it up from. And you're right. Also, Pedestal had that in it as well. But it's like you want a clear path. You want to make your interactions. You want to know what's going to happen one thing after the other. That's why the entire reframe tutorial is all framed as being a set of dominoes, one thing leading to the other, and leading to the next, leading to the next. And it's very deterministic. You know exactly how every event is going to get handled. They're always done in the same boring way, in the same boring fashion. So you know exactly how it will happen this time and how it will happen the time after. So you kind of take away the you take away any sense of difference each time round. So
it's always predictable.
That's it. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah, it's exactly predictable. So whereas the two-way binding, it was very non-deterministic. What you never knew quite how one thing was going to cause an update to something else. So that's very definitely what we wanted. We wanted sort of like a a set of dominoes, one hitting the other, so you always knew what was going to happen next and what had happened before this to even cause this domino. And so you could break your system up into little parts, and you know kind of where within the dominant set of dominoes they were.
I think there's two parts to that flow as well. There's like the whole like talking back to servers and having the UI stuff, and then there's, because I think that's more complicated. But then like what you're talking about at the moment is mostly just on the UI side, isn't it? Mostly like, you know, somebody makes a change to the UI, and now what happens? You know, so someone clicks that box, and like you say, basically you trigger a function. That function gets called. That may result in some new data in the database, which in reframe's case is some set of atoms or an atom. And then you have listeners, if I'm not wrong, you have listeners on that, or subscribers on that atom.
Yeah.
And all the subscribers are kind of automatically updated. And this is where it starts to get fun, I think, because you have a kind of like broadcast effect of all of these changes. So how does it stay predictable with that kind of broadcast?
The broadcast. I mean, reframe apps are 75% derived data. You know, so
right.
So because you have to view the user interface itself as derived data of the state.
Right.
So you've got your what we call AppDB, which is really application state, and then that's the root of a tree. And then the leaves of that tree are actually the view functions that actually render HTML. So again, that sort of data is produced right on the leaves. And between the root of the tree, which is AppDB, and the views, there is this kind of signal graph. And the signal graph basically takes data which is stored within AppDB and progressively transforms it, possibly through a few steps, sometimes just one step, from raw data stored in AppDB, which is kind of we view as something of an in-memory database, is the kind of the view that we have of it. It's a series of materialized views are made, and then finally the UI itself is the ultimate materialized view. That's the ultimate expression of what data we currently have in AppDB. So all of that is just derived data. So and that data flows through a signal graph, and each node in the signal graph has a chance to modify it in some way. So we may take some items out of AppDB. We may then sort them. We may then take particular elements out of the maps in each of the items to form our materialized view. And then ultimately there are view functions which will turn those sorted items into nodes that appear on the in the DOM. So 75% of a reframe app is really derived data. If you include all the UI, which you should, because the UI is just more data. That's hiccup. So there's this flow of data through the signal graph, and that's of course pretty deterministic. It sort of happens pretty much the same way every time.
Yeah, I think isn't it the basis that, I mean, we kind of forget it sometimes with Clojure and ClojureScript, is that the reality is that in these other apps like Flex and JavaScript, we don't have immutability, whereas with ClojureScript, and we have this atoms and we do transactions on the data. So it's that immutability, that foundational stuff that gives us this predictability.
Yeah. There's other aspects of reframe which help with that as well. So, for example, when an event occurs, so if a button gets pressed and an event gets emitted, the handling of that event may cause some complicated changes to AppDB, the state of the application. But that state of the application is committed like in one transaction at the end. So we might change 5 different parts of AppDB, but almost like a commit with a database, the complete transaction happens in one step, because that's always what you hate in applications, and what happens in the object-oriented world a bit is that you start updating stuff throughout memory, and of course you get halfway through that process and you're in an intermediate state. in some form. Like I've
Yes.
done half of the changes, but not all of them yet. And so that's what would happen a little bit with the two-way binding I was talking about before in something like Flex. Whereas luckily in our case, we make all the changes to AppDB, and it's only then that it gets committed, if you like, and it's only then
Right.
that all the derived data actually gets calculated from that one-off, that transactional commit, if you like. So that tends to make things subtly easier as well. It's only a small thing, but if ever you've been bitten by, systems that get into intermediate kind of inconsistent states, it's just a small thing that's nice. Just removes one type of problem.
This is, if you see the two-way binding thing, especially because I think we skipped at least 20-30 generations of JavaScript frameworks, jumping from Flex to, I don't know, all the way until
React.
Reframe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember I used to follow this shit a lot, and since Backbone, and before that EXTJS, and then that became Sencha, and then there was Sprout Core. I don't know if you have ever heard about that one. That was
It's a name I remember, but I don't know anything about it. No, I remember looking at Backbone. At one time, trying to maybe make the jump across to JavaScript at one point.
Yeah. So I think there was like first there was Yahoo UI XJS stuff, which would look like really Windows like components, like a grid component and stuff like that. And then later we had this Dojo toolkit, and then Require.js and AMD modules and
UE tools.
yeah, exactly. And then there was so many things that moved along, because especially the two-way binding, I remember from, I think it was in Dojo and later Ember and Sprout Core as well, because Sprout Core was I think one of the frameworks that Apple adopted for iCloud web stuff. And yeah, I mean they first made the presentation software online, and then it was like, wow, amazing, I'm gonna use Sprout Core now. And then the one the as you said, the applications, when the scale becomes bigger and bigger, it becomes completely unmanageable. It becomes so painful to see which shit is modifying what.
Yeah, and in
So
what
that's
order?
something.
Yeah, but it
Yeah,
looks
exactly.
fantastic at small scale. Like in your small demos,
Exactly.
like there's so
Yeah.
little code. Like where even is the code? Like there is no code. It's all just magic happening through all these bindings. It's magic, and then you try and scale
Yeah.
it up, and it's a disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what would you change if you're going to redo the reframe? So reframe.
Oh, okay.
What would be different?
Okay, so it's a little hard to describe, but it's like you know how I sort of said that reframe is 75% derived data. At the moment, we have a signal graph that I was just talking about before. So data flows through the signal graph, and we use reagents, reactions underneath that. One of the things that I would change if I was doing it again, and it's would be a change just in how we implement that, not the concepts. Like so, to the programmer, the concepts would be the same, but just the way that I implemented that would be different. I just wouldn't use Java reagents. Reactions anymore, because that's actually a classic case of distributing your state all over the place. You get these little nodes, you end up with a graph with all these little nodes. I just wouldn't do it that way again. I'd do it I'd just do it in one place. I'd store it all in one place. And not distribute it with a number of little nodes all talking to each other, because that's a classic little object-oriented system, right? That was a mistake, but but it's just an implementation mistake. I can change that if ever I get round to it, so that I don't make that one again. There's not a lot I would change. There are definitely things I would like to do better. I think in the do better area, one of the areas I don't think Reframe does a good enough job is in I'll probably call it higher order behaviors. That's just there. What happens is a user clicks the button, and then there's a whole lot of behavior that has to occur that's often async, right? So you've got to go off and you've got to talk to the server, and you've got to wait, and you've got to put a twirly up, and and maybe you might time out, and then you've got to explain to the user that it timed out and ask them to, do you want to hit another button and try again, or do you want to abort this whole thing? And there's all of this sort of like stuff that has to happen that's really very state machine-ish. There's a little, you hit the button and you're just off into this little state machine. And like in Redux, they do it with Redux sagas. They try and do it with something called Redux sagas, which is they use now my JavaScript is not that strong, but they use the generator of what in Python would have been generator functions and async and all of that sort of stuff. So they kind of write little state machines in JavaScript rather than representing the state machine in data, which is I think what we'd prefer to do. So as far as I can tell, well, anyway, I would like to have a better solution for that. That's for sure. That's you enter a little like everything in reframe is about events. Nothing happens without an event. But in these sort of cases, the user clicks on a button, that's an event. But then there's all these downstream events, like we've sent something to the server's responded with a failure. Now we've got to handle that failure. There's a little there's a little state machine that you need to implement to actually do that. And I don't think Reframe does a good enough job of that at the moment. So that certainly is something I'd like to improve on. The interesting thing is how to do it. And I've kind of been looking, the state machine stuff really fascinates me a little bit. And there's something called behavior trees. I don't know if you've ever heard with them, but that's something that the gaming community uses to implement. Now, I'm not a big gamer, so I don't. NPEs, what are they called? Non-playing entities or something? Little bits of AI that run around the inside of the game, shooting you and trying to kill you and make your life difficult. Well, that's all done with state machines, and that's done with behavior trees. Behavior trees are a very composable form of state machine. So I'm kind of intrigued by them. I don't know if they'll. I'm kind of intrigued by all the good stuff that the gaming community does. Like I feel as if we're the poor cousins across in our world somehow. They've figured out this retain mode graphic stuff years ago, and we've only just got React just a little while ago. They do so much good stuff over there. I feel like we should be stealing more of it. What are we doing?
So you want to gamify everything, including backend code.
I want to take the best of the ideas. No, I was pretty intrigued.
But they're very mutable, aren't they? They're into very mutable state. The gamers.
Yeah, they certainly have been doing the retained mode graphic stuff, which is kind of like what React is, sort of for the longest time. That's my understanding. I'm not a gaming developer, but sort of I get the impression that they're always about 2 steps ahead of us.
Yeah. So the most important questions. I mean, we have 2 important questions. First of all,
before we move on to the important questions, I mean, you mentioned because there was a thing in Clojure, in the ClojureScript community, maybe it's about a year ago, that some guy did what do you call it? A state machine on top of reframe, actually. From Cognitect. I can't remember. I think it was just called restate or something.
There's been a couple of attempts at that. So here's the thing. I think that if you're going to go the state machine road, you have to go all in on, you have to come up with a very good and flexible state machine model. Like Harel, like I read all the background behind what he's done. And when you, he was doing a lot of work in Israel with Defense Force, sort of in Defense Force contracting, as far as I can tell, working and they were trying to make an aeroplane. And they needed a way to model the specifications for all of the avionics systems, and they were struggling horribly. And so they got Harel to come in, and he created, the hierarchical sort of state machines. You've got to do and I think we just got to learn from here. All the state machine stuff that I've done, or that I've seen, is kind of a fairly impoverished version of state machines. What he found is that you've got to have quite a rich model. So you've got to have history states. You've got to have it hierarchical. Otherwise, the state machine stuff is not expressive enough. And the UIs very quickly you end up with a UI where you're using a state machine, but it's just not expressive enough. And so you're out. You're just busted at that point, because you can't do what you need to do. You got to somehow break out of the mold, and you're gone at that point. So I think that if anyone does it, they've got to be all in, with all the features that Harel's already identified that you need to properly specify interesting behavior. So most of the attempts that I've seen so far have been limited, So yeah, I've seen that stuff come past. I'm pretty interested in it. We did something called reframe async flow, which was, we had a problem which was when our application started up.
I've used that actually.
Yeah, when our app started, you go through this little state machine at the beginning of your app where you connect with the back end and you get something, and then you're off to an S3 bucket, and on the basis of that, and you load something else. So there's this boom 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 process that, and of course you could get failure at any point, and you want to fire off these two things once this thing is completed. It's all the async stuff, and that's a little state machine as well. So I'm kind of fascinated by the whole. How do we? It feels like the next layer of reframe should be something about properly doing state machines, and I've seen a couple of people try, and that's why I've looked at behavior trees. If anyone wants to do something with behavior trees, I reckon they look pretty good to me. That's very composable. Represent them in data. Part of the problem with state machines is they're not very composable. That's what I mean. Like, it feels like there's something good there, but I don't know yet quite what it is. I'd love to have a good solution for that. That's not really what I do differently with reframe. It's what I do next, I think. If ever I get time. We spend all of our time on reframe 10x. It will make you a 10x programmer.
Oh,
wow.
Yeah.
That's our claim. The ugly secret, though, is, of course, that the 10x programmer then becomes 100x. So, you don't catch up. But
so the most important question, the question of every episode. So do you use Emacs or some other shit? This is kind of a strange thing to ask, people from Australia.
Yeah. Look, I spend most of my time writing PowerPoint slides or responding to emails. Or
you can do that in Emacs, by the way.
Yeah. So no, we use cursive.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I think I'm pretty sure Colin is bribing you. He's in Australia.
No, don't say that. He's in New Zealand.
Oh yeah,
exactly. He'll hate you forever. He'll hate you forever for that.
Even more.
It's too far for us, so it's all abstracted away into
I know. We're just an abstract blob on the opposite side of the world, aren't we? An undifferentiated set of islands. Yeah. No, Daniel, by the way, is also in New Zealand.
Yeah. Well, we spoke to him as well. Yeah. So the other question is, so which came first, the documentation or the code for reframe? Because this is like the biggest thing ever.
They both came along together. I kind of realized, like I said, my brain was a bit of a washing machine at one time. There were all these ideas floating around and banging into each other, so I had to get them down onto paper. And I had to explain them what I was thinking to the guys in the team as well. So it started off as kind of bullet points, and then it, this paragraph got a bit fleshed out, and that paragraph got more fleshed out, and asked some questions, and I thought, oh yeah, that's a good point. I should explain that. So, but because it was all intended really to be internal, so I could be as cheeky as I liked in it. So, and also, like, I was having a good time. Like, I really was having a good time.
Yeah.
Like, I'm talking about it being a bit of a washing machine, but it was a very stimulating, fun time, sort of trying to pull all this stuff together. So that kind of came through in the way that I was talking about it. I was just having fun with it all. And it just slowly, it just got bigger and bigger and ended up way too many words. And I think Eric Norman called it eccentric. So I felt like an English gent who wore sort of purple suits, who had a fascination with Amazonian sort of butterflies or something. But anyway, we calmed it down after that. But it was, look, I'm doing it at the moment. I'm writing down stuff that I want to change with reframe. I find that I have to get stuff out of my head and down onto paper so I can think of other thoughts, get it out of my head down there. Right, now I got that down there, now I can have other thoughts. So, and the clearer I can write it, the clearer I understand it. And so it's very much a selfish exercise for myself as much as anything else. So, it all happened at the same time. One didn't come before the other.
Well, I think people really like your informal style.
My
like you say,
eccentric
it's a bit
style.
cheeky, but
Yeah.
but I think it's really, I think it really engages people. So I think you've done a great job there.
Trying to have a sense of humor with technical documentation is risky, I think. Scott Adams, the guy who does Dilbert, right? I read a piece of his once where he said that at least 25% of the population don't have a sense of humor. And I genuinely mean that they can see other people laughing, but for them, it's not funny. And like
Not
the
funny.
reframe docs, there's all this stuff in there that they would experience as just annoying roadblocks. Now what's he doing? And so what's he crapping on about with now? So there's at least 25% of the population for whom that serves. It's a nuisance, right? And then there's there's probably another 40% of the population who kind of do have a sense of humor, but it's mostly about awkward social moments. And then
I think the Venn diagram for his.
So this is Scott Adams' theory, and I tend to agree with it. And so your audience, if you're trying to do any smart-ass humor, is sort of at best about 40% of the population who will actually appreciate it. But you get survivor bias. So with something like Reframe, 40% of the population didn't mind it, and as a result, they hung around and told me it was great. What I didn't see was the other 60% of the population who just went, "This is a load of crap, and I'm not reading anymore." I never saw them, and I never heard from them again.
I don't think anybody got to the point until they're going to ask for a T-shirt. That point people gave up. And I was wondering, maybe there should be like a, on GitHub they had this raw and then the diff mode and this kind of stuff. So there should be like a switch on the top that should say, with humor, and then maybe a slider like how much amount of humor do you want?
How much am I prepared to put up with?
And then the documentation has.
Yeah, you see the 40%. Actually, I sit in the 40% generally. I quite enjoy the smart aleck humor because it gives me a bit of novelty, and I kind of like that in my technical documentation. But I totally get that people like there's just other people for whom it's nothing but a pain in the neck, and I'm sorry. but I'm not going to change. I do it for my own enjoyment. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so reframe 10x. You said reframe 10x will make me 10 times programmer, but I'm at 0. So probably, regardless of what multiplier it's going to be, I'll still be at 0. What is reframe 10x?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So we've been working away on this for a while, probably about 18 months actually, but it stalled for a long time. And then last year, Daniel organized. Did Daniel? I'm not sure exactly how it worked, but sort of we had two Ruby girls who were sponsored, and they chose to work on reframe 10x. They put up a proposal, it got accepted. Kristen Saskia worked on it for about 3 months. They had a bunch of. They were in Berlin. It's a hotbed of reframe activity in Berlin, I've decided. It always seems to be reframey things going on over there. I'm going to go there one day, and maybe I will be famous over there. Not here, but over there maybe. So there's that they did that, and that kind of they solved a problem which had sort of been hanging around, which we hadn't solved, which was how to use CLJS DevTools. Absolutely wonderful tool. Like we should thank Darwin every single day for creating that tool. They found a way of taking his they and their mentors in Berlin how to just get that into Reagent basically, so that we could use all the work that Darwin had done, and my goodness, he's done a lot of work on how to show data structures. So that was a real breakthrough because we kind of wanted that for a little while, and they managed to make that happen. So we then sort of put our foot on the accelerator and did a bunch of other things, and we probably spent way too much time in the last 6 months doing it. Programmers will spend way too much time on tools for themselves. Like they like that. So there's something pleasurable about knowing your target market and and
Emacs.
yeah, Emacs.
Oh, shut
Yeah.
up.
He's off.
50 years
yeah,
later.
that's and Daniel's done a lot of I think great. Well, I keep on telling him he's doing the most interesting job in Clojure at the moment. He doesn't believe me, but it just we're doing form by form tracing of ClojureScript work, and so when an event handler runs, you can use a macro that Daniel's written, and it will give you form by form tracing of that. And I went back and had a look at Light Table probably about
Hmm.
2 months ago, just to have a look at how it did things. We're looking for
Yeah.
inspiration, and we realised that we're doing a much better job than Light Table.
Hmm.
What we were showing Light Table, my memory of Light Table was that it was absolutely breathtaking. And kind of when I went back to it and had a
Yeah.
look at InstaRepls, which by the way they've now removed, so I had to find how
Yeah.
InstaRepls worked, with old YouTube videos. But like you really
Yeah.
only got let bindings and you got args and you got final values. And yet, what
Hmm.
Daniel's managed to do is he's actually managed to get form by form tracing, and we kind of show it with indentation in a particular way. I don't know. I love it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like when you, it's certainly got some sharp edges still. Like, don't give it a big loop; that could blow it up. But sort of,
Yeah.
it feels like it's just a good basis for some good stuff. Mind you, we run out of time now to work on it. We really got to go and do some work that we'll get paid for. But it's been fun, and I think it feels like something really useful. So
Yeah, I think it
yeah,
is because we were at Clojure D in Berlin, as you said. Berlin is probably the probably conclave of reagent now inside Germany.
yes,
I don't know, Australia probably or New Zealand. So I think it was Saskia or somebody.
yes,
She gave
Saskia,
a
yeah.
quick talk about that one as
Yeah,
well.
Saskia was
Yeah.
one of the Ruby girls, one of the two Ruby girls I said before, Chris and Saskia. They both
Yeah,
worked on it in Berlin, and
yeah,
they cracked this little problem, and we've
yeah,
run with it since then, and we've done a lot of work, a lot of styling. Greg, who also works at Dayat, he's done a lot of work on the styling, so it looks
mm,
pretty, and it does
mm,
quite an interesting job. We're going to sit back and actually
yeah,
use our own tool now for a while and just sort of see what we
mm,
learn from it, because
Mm,
you have all these good ideas, right? Oh, we need this, oh, we need that, but it's only really use which
yeah.
will um, uh, knock the edges off it and produce a better tool. But
Nice. So
we think it's something people should try.
yeah, I think
yeah, definitely.
it's one of the nicest tools. I mean, I haven't tried it yet, but I saw the demos and everything, and I saw the talk
Mm.
by Saskia as
Mm.
well. It was super fun. So what is the so you work at Day 8? I mean, is it like a consulting company,
No,
or is it you have your own
it's
products?
my little company. We've got about 6 people in it, 6 developers, and I've probably been in the advertising industry for 20 years, and
Oh,
what
you're like Madman of Australia.
no. Sorry, it's not me that's in our software's in the advertising industry, but in
Oh, okay,
particular
okay.
into how do you place ads on TV. So we do the
Ah,
optimization sort of stuff around that. So we've got a very, very particular niche that we work in
okay.
with TV networks and with advertising agencies. Yeah.
But one of the things is that, especially because it's your own company, how did you feel when you're picking up a language like Clojure, where you're probably the only guy in Australia at that time who is doing Clojure, or maybe two other people,
Look,
and
there's
betting a company on this one?
there's actually a pretty good closure meetup actually in Sydney, and there's one
Mm.
down in
All right.
Melbourne, and Daniel used to run the one in Auckland in New Zealand. So there's a bit going on with closure, and it's not huge, but there's a
Mm.
bit. There's always about 20 along to the meetup in Sydney.
Oh,
It's growing.
okay.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
very slightly, but sort of it's definitely bigger than what it was a couple of years ago.
Mm.
So yeah, like I said, we had to make a change because we had to get out of Flash,
yeah.
and
Mm.
it was just the best option. I mean, and I, I I'm convinced. I haven't seen anything that looks better. Let me put it that way.
Mm.
I would change in a flash. I'm too old to get too connected to too many technologies and too attached to them. I've seen them all come and go. So I would change in a flash if I thought there was something better. And I feel like
Yeah.
ClojureScript for front end work is a really good solution at the moment. It's in a good
Yeah.
place. We feel very productive.
So there has been some discussions recently, of course, on the podcast and also on the internet about the whole error messages stuff and specs, and Clojure being
Mm.
extremely painful for the beginners, and all that stuff. So what is your experience has been on this one,
Well,
especially with error messages?
remember that I care more about PowerPoint presentation error messages than Clojure messages, but sort of uh, no, yeah. Look, it's it would be good if it was better. It would
Yep.
be good if there was more focus on it. But look, there'll be reasons for it. I'm unaware of them. It's a funny thing, isn't it? There's definitely a split between
Mm.
look where if you're doing a lot of development in Clojure, you're effectively betting your career to some degree on Clojure, and as a result, you care about the community growing. And
Mm.
I've got a company. We'd like to, if we needed more Clojure people, we'd like to be able to find them. So it
Yep.
matters to us whether there's a strong Clojure community. Um, and I think that anything that we can do to improve that is a good thing. And getting people
Mm.
so I'm not sure that's Cognitec's point of view, though. I
Mm.
mean, I don't know anyone from Cognitec, so I am speculating wildly. But they certainly have an agenda, and I'm sure that it makes utter sense to them. It'll be around
Mm.
Datomic and all of that, so that makes perfect sense. But I'm not sure it's that well aligned to the rest of the community in terms of everybody else just wants Clojure to work. We want it bigger.
Yeah.
We want more smart
Yeah.
people in it doing more interesting things. Thanks very much, because that's generally a good thing. Generally that's a good
Mm.
thing, and it really matters how difficult it is. It really matters your initial experiences of anything really matters, right?
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
I remember I got into Python at one time because, one afternoon I thought I'd try Python, and then like within 2 hours I was coding away, and I've never looked back. Python's
Yeah.
one of the best languages I've ever used, but it's like
Mm.
that was because the onboarding process with Python was just so delightful. The
Yeah.
documentation was extraordinarily good. I could start off at a very simple level, and in no time I was up and running. And it was like it was like heroin. I was into it and I was away. Um, I
are you are you recovering, Mike? Are you?
so my parents kept on telling me anyway. They kept on warning me about these things, and Python was it for me. So yeah,
Kids, don't do
yeah,
heroin, so no
I did
Python.
Python instead, and look where I am now. Every no, it was so it was very easy to get going. There was no road bumps, and suddenly I was
Yeah.
producing perfectly good programs. So and
Mm.
we'd all like that sort of for Clojure as well, really. And
Mm.
what can you say? It keeps on coming up, doesn't it, as an issue?
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing that VJ mentioned there was spec. I was wondering if you have a place for spec in reframe, Mike.
Oh, I think so.
That's going to be something adding that adds value or something.
Yeah. Definitely. We already use spec. I think if you're using reframe, you should have a spec for what's in AppDB, because the instant that something that an event handler changes AppDB in a way that doesn't match the spec, you should know immediately when you're doing your development work. So yeah, specking AppDB is absolute. We do that. We've got specs for our AppDB. There's a thought that maybe you might want to spec also what's in an event, but I've wondered about that on occasions, but sort of, I don't know, I've never been too motivated down that path. Events tend to be very simple things. So, I'm always cautious about adding a lot of code. Like I don't, for example, unit test any
Yeah.
view code. I sort of I say that in the doc somewhere, that sort of I don't unit test view code because they're an unlikely source of bugs in my experience, right? Whereas event
Mm.
handlers, that's where your bugs are going to happen, right? So you want they're likely to screw up AppDB in some way that you never thought of, right? So good idea to have a spec to check AppDB, but do you really need specs for events? I don't know. Probably, maybe I've thought about that, but maybe not. You can also spec the output of subscription nodes, possibly. That's probably more sensible in my opinion, because you're doing sometimes you're doing complicated transformations on what's coming out of AppDB. You can get that wrong, but I think right now you can use spec.
So coming from Python, you said Python you really like that language. So what do you miss in Clojure compared to Python?
Triple quoted strings.
Okay. Just so you're gonna write a macro for that one now.
No, because with triple quoted strings from Python, you don't need to backslash, double quotes everywhere, which means that suddenly your doc strings are so much more readable. They haven't got all of this, meta backslash stuff in them, and that drives me bananas. That just feels like I understand the reason. The reason is that there's a potential for a backwards compatibility problem, because if two strings had been put one right next, I can't remember. There's some obscure situation where introducing triple quoted strings now might cause a problem. I'd do it in a flash. If I was Mr. Hickey, I would do it in a flash.
But this is all coming from Perl here doc stuff, right? I mean, this is a long time ago.
Yeah.
That probably Python carried it over, and it was never Lisp sort of.
Isn't there a Java proposal now to do something exactly like that?
I think only string interpolation, as I remember, not triple quoted stuff. Maybe I'm wrong.
To have the same effect where you can embed quotes inside of your quotes.
Okay.
Inside of your strings. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I mean, but you're right. That's interesting. Yeah.
That would be.
That is the only thing you miss from Python.
It's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
What else do I miss? The thing you notice about Python is just the size of the library, the size of there's so much available to you. Anything you want to do, there's a library for it. And it's normally a top quality library that's just fantastic. You look at it and go, wow, there's years of effort that's gone into this, and it's well documented. It's I just pick it up and I use it, and it's and we're away. Was my experience with Python. It's anything I ever wanted to do, there was a library for it. So okay. I think it's a very pragmatic language, Python. I mean, so I think that Clojure is too, by the way. But sort of it's a very pragmatic language. It's kind of object oriented. It's a bit, it's certainly got plenty of functional to it. It's a very pragmatic language. I very easy to do good things in it. What you sometimes find is you see people bagging out PHP or something like that, right? But if you've done good work in a language, like let's say you'd put out a nice system based upon PHP, you won't have a bar of it. Like I'm a bit like that with C++. Like I did a decade of C++, and I hate it when people criticize C++ because I go, I think I did some of my finest work in C++. Doing really, the browser that we're attempting to use is written in C++. So once you've done good work in a language, you kind of you don't want to hear any you don't brook much criticism of it because you've seen it work well for you.
Anyway, so apart from reframe, so there are other efforts like this going on to make like a kind of a framework around these things, like Fulcro, for example. Did you take a look at them? What do you think of?
I haven't. I should go over, have a look, and steal all the good bits that I can find. No doubt, it's actually slack on my part that I haven't gone across there and seen what they're doing really well. But I get the impression Fulcro is much more of a front end connected to back end thing, like
it's a whole stack thing.
Stack,
So which is which will be perfect for some people. No, I don't know too much about it though, sadly.
Okay. But the backend stuff, what kind of things that you use for the backend? Is it usually something that is under your design control?
Yes.
Okay.
We use a sort of our intention is to use, because we're getting into this a lot more, is CQRS-ish type of approach. Which is very reframe-ish, right? You send a command. It's not RESTful. You send a command, you interpret the command on the server, and then you kind of effectively have subscriptions as well, sort of really,
Yeah.
to get data out. So we were using RethinkDB at one stage. Unfortunately, that fell
Oh,
over.
yeah.
Um,
That's gone. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, not fully though. I
Yeah,
think
Giant look after it,
it's.
don't they?
no,
No, I think
Not
it's with
Giant.
the
They have,
Linux
they have their
Foundation.
own organization. Yeah, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I kind of really liked that idea of being able to get
Yeah.
real-time
Yeah.
updates out of the back end
Yeah.
into the front end. It kind of, because we're writing distributed systems, right? And the clients have to be connected to the back end, and they're all part of this one great big system. And that real-time flow of information, we abused that. That was great. I love that. Our design sort of like there is just some problems that just get so nicely solved with having that capability. But unfortunately, I think that's really, I mean, we're still using it in the back end, but it'll be, and it's actually completely functional as it is right now, RethinkDB,
Sure.
but there's no further development really that's ever going to happen on it. So, come 5 years from now, it'll be really showing its age. Yeah. But no, much more, Postgresy these days, and CQRS and Postgres, and yeah.
Nice.
But aren't there things like CouchDB which would give you those kind of things, Mike?
I seem to remember looking at CouchDB at one stage. Wasn't there some problems with data integrity on CouchDB, or am I getting mixed up with Mongo?
No, it's Mongo.
It's Mongo, is it? Yeah.
It's always Mongo.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think the poor guys who did RethinkDB, they cared a lot about data integrity, and there was Mongo just screaming along and getting $10 million worth of funding, and screwing up databases. I mean, I'm probably being too harsh on Mongo, but you know what I mean? It's like that's another very good example of people just got into Mongo and it seemed easy and they just got going. This is the Python story I was talking about before. And then before you know it, they're kind of invested and they're committed, and it doesn't matter about data integrity anymore. And off they go. So that's what happens when you give people a fast path in. That they're.
I think this is the worse is better sort of situation. I think.
Yeah.
And once you get in, you have to. Yeah.
And
that's true heroin. That's
the Python heroin path. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing about Mongo, I haven't used it for a little while, and it's probably like you say, it's probably better now. But I remember the early days of Mongo when they didn't used to use fsync. So they used to take a commit from you, but they didn't actually commit it to the file system.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because fsync makes it a lot slower.
So slow.
It turns out. So I know they fixed that now. So
Yeah, no doubt we're being far too harsh on MongoDB too. So there'll be people out there and sort of say, you know what you were saying about PHP before? Well, guess what? I've written good systems using MongoDB, and I don't need to hear you criticize it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I've used it myself. Yeah, and it's fine.
Yeah. So maybe
it was
Firebase,
just fun at the beginning.
Instead of RethinkDB, there's Firebase. There's a new Google Firebase database out, because the original one was a very limited sort of hierarchical model that it was limited, right? Whereas the new one looks much more fully featured. You can do better queries and indexes and all that sort of stuff. That could be an interesting path too.
Yeah, and you're probably going to last a bit longer if it's under Google's supervision.
Yeah, that's of course, like Allo, like Google Plus, like
Google Wave. Yeah.
Do you remember the days? Not that long ago when there was Google I/O would happen, and it's like you were sitting on the edge of your seat waiting to hear what came out.
Which one?
This is maybe 7 years ago now.
Yeah.
Who can remember the last Google I/O? I don't know. I didn't see it. I didn't watch it.
No.
And even the Apple, the Apple events, sitting on the edge of your seat waiting. We don't have those events anymore. No.
I mean, we do, but people, I think.
We have the conj now.
Well, I was about to say we have Rich Hickey's keynote to look forward to.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's all Rich Hickey.
Yeah, I put I have to tell you, the last conj the videos came up, and I saw that the Rich Hickey, his keynote was up, and I went, right, it's pointless to resist not procrastinating and watching that, right? So I now must watch that. I went and got myself a cup of tea, came back, sat down, and I remember just noticing my sense of satisfaction and enjoyment for what was about to happen. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I just knew it was going to be good, and of course it was. But sort of, you're right. That's the new Google I/O for us. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm wondering next time Richie comes on, then it's completely mundane stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? You're all sitting. I was like, oh my God, my mind is blown now. I am sitting now. Oh, this is amazing. But anyway, there were some interesting things. But I think the last talk that I saw was about the music and other stuff. And then he was like, he started it like, I know you guys are expecting I'm going to reveal something magical, but I'm going to talk about music.
Okay. No, the last conch one was the one where he gave all the layers of what's actually hard, right? And that was such a good talk. As an older programmer, I loved what he said there. That was, solving that intricate solving of puzzles that you see in Scala and Haskell or whatever. It's so true.
What I liked about that, though, was the fact that it seemed like the people were concerned about that it's all these old guys that are doing Clojure now, and it's all, that's it was quite, I mean, the funny thing is that I think there's something to that, but because we're all kind of, let's say, mature gentlemen on the podcast here, but when we went to the Berlin Clojure D, it was very, very young, very youthful. It was nice to see that there's a lot of generations interested in Clojure. This is not just for, wizened, sort of like skeptical, hardened old kind of programmers as well. Which is good.
Can I ask? Well, actually, I'll tell you my process of actually becoming interested in Lisp was really. I did it all the way back in uni. I remember we did a course on Snowball, Lisp, and comparative.
Wow,
comparative. It was one semester, and it was kind of comparative languages or something. And we did Snowball, Lisp, and there was some other language, can't remember. And so that was my introduction.
Fortran.
And back in no, Fortran was a staple back then. These were the weird languages, right? Snowball and Lisp.
maybe.
Yeah. And then I don't think the next time I heard about Lisp was really with CLOS. I went to an object-oriented conference in one of the Uppsala conferences years ago, and there was somebody up the front talking about CLOS, and I remember trying it. And then and really the next time I heard about Lisps seriously, other than just whispers here and there, was probably the Paul Graham stuff. How he wrote all of those essays.
Arc and
they were very influential. I've spoken to lots of people really, and I get the feeling a lot of people became quite interested in Clojure or Lisp in general, because of those particular essays. Does that match your experience at all?
I'm not sure, because there was I saw Lisp almost 10 years ago now, I think. Because in when I started programming, I'm not as experienced as you guys are, but I started with C, and then I did all the 3D stuff and Macromedia crap and that kind of stuff, and then C++, and then later I got into Java. I think the Lisp stuff because of Practical Common Lisp book that I started reading by Siebel a long time ago. And then during that time, because I was heavily invested in Java, and then I was wondering, okay, is there something on Java? At that time, I think there was also Shen on Java, and then there were a couple of other experiments running on JVM to write Lisp. And then I saw in 2008 or something, I saw Clojure as well. Then I did completely weird shit like writing Wicket, Apache Wicket, like a web framework, plugins in Clojure for some weird reason. Don't ask.
But you survived.
Yeah. And then I moved on, and then I started pursuing Clojure a bit. But yeah, I think the one of the influential things was also the Paul Graham's things about on Lisp and why Lisp is a better programming language and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know how Ray got into it.
Well, I mean, for me, it was more like I didn't know Lisp at all, and I didn't. I actually ended up getting into Lisp bizarrely because of Scala, because I went to a conference I saw the Scala guy talk at some conference, and I thought, yeah, that looks like the FP. This looks like the way. There's a lot of magic going on in Scala, and he was talking about the compiler, how you can have one part of the compiler evaluating the other part, and it all seemed quite tricky. But then he was explaining some nice things about how they can handle collections and stuff like this. So actually, I tried with Scala first, and then I realized that Scala was too complicated, and I ended up watching, bizarrely, I ended up watching some sort of YouTube stuff around Scheme and following the MIT course on Scheme. And then I eventually found the other one, the SICP YouTube course. And the whole Paul Graham stuff, it just passed me by, to be honest. I was into Java and Scala, all the VM stuff. And then eventually, after Scala, I realized that, I was listening to some podcasts, and actually it was an Australian podcast, and I can't remember what it was now, but they were talking about how much easier Clojure was than Scala. So I thought, what's this about then? So it was all very tangential. I haven't. It's not a straight road, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was learning Scala just because I felt, that whole learn a new language every second year thing.
Yeah,
I was learning Scala, and I was about a month into it, and I just sort of went, oh well, I'm just not interested in this. This is too hard. Like my problems are hard. I don't want my language to be hard. So, which is exactly what Richiki was talking about before. I had that direct experience where I was just sort of there going, no, I am just not going to devote this much of my brain to my language. I have to devote it to my problem. So, then at the same time, I read something that a Scala person was saying, yeah, I love Scala. I spend 3 days coming up with a perfect solution. And then towards the end, this person who was a Scala programmer said, mind you, the Clojure programmer, they got out of there in just under an hour. And their solution was just fine. And I went, now that language sounds like me. I wonder what that is. Yeah. I'm intrinsically a bit lazy. So I want that 1 hour job, not the 3 days of intricate beauty. So, that's how I ended up.
Fair enough. Okay. I think we have, almost 1.5 hours, 8 minutes to go. So Mike, anything else you want to talk about other than whatever the stuff that we spoke for almost 1.5 hours now?
Well, probably we were talking before about community before. So Daniel's been doing a lot of work with Clojure Together.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I think that Clojure Together, that feels like an important thing. And in particular, I think they've got some companies involved, but really for anyone listening, I think that you've got to get, it's all very good for you to be involved, but really you've got to get the companies involved, because the companies have the deeper pockets. $500 a month or whatever sort of a fee it is, for a company who's doing a lot of Clojure work, that's cheap because, they're getting the tooling improved, the documentation, whatever else they do. That feels like a very good initiative and something for people to, something very concrete that you can do to improve Clojure. So, so convince your company that they should be, trying to give to Clojure Together. They're going to do good stuff from what I can see.
Great point. Yeah,
I agree. So Clojure Together.
Yes, yeah. Get your company to join.
Exactly.
Nothing else, I don't think. I mean, Reframe will continue to evolve step by step. There's a secret folder underneath docs called EP, which is where I do documentation on new features that no one ever knows about, but don't tell anyone. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're not going to look there.
No, don't look there. And it's actually non-eccentric too. No, it's no jokes. So some people who find those jokes a hurdle, they'll like that. Give Reframe 10x a go. That's give that a go, and
then become 10x programmer.
That's right. Become the 10x programmer you always wanted to be. Yeah, that's what we guarantee when you start using it.
Start, even not even finish.
Just
that's
the moment
amazing.
your
That's
fingers hit the keyboard and type.
As soon as you include that dependency, you're done, basically.
Bang. Yeah.
Super batteries.
Yeah.
On that bombshell. Nice. Okay, so I think that's it from us for today. Thanks a lot, Mike. I've taken time today on Sunday evening, and there's been a bit of a difficult thing to arrange all the things with stuff working upside down in Australia.
and me using
Um,
Windows.
mm.
There, I said it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
exactly.
admitted it.
Oh, shit.
Not only
my
do I
God.
use cursive, but I use Windows. It's like
It's okay. I mean, your documentation is your way of
my
cleansing it.
cleansing.
So that's okay. So we well, I don't take any offense in you using Windows anymore. So
In
that's
fact,
fine.
I think this confirms.
Imagine that.
Doesn't this confirm
Of course,
everything
so-
that you know about people who don't use Emacs?
No, I think that the thing is that once you use Emacs, I think you will start with the reframe 1000x.
Look, I actually did. This will probably be the worst thing, but I did used to use Emacs a gazillion years ago.
Oh,
Yeah, VI,
Wow.
then Emacs. So, you know.
I think otherwise you would not gain this much of wisdom. I know
okay,
that.
yeah. You can stop. I'll give
That's
you
all because
24
of
hours to
Emacs.
stop that flattery. Yeah. All right.
So that's it from us for today. This is episode number 34, and this is Vijay from Holland and Ray from Belgium. And just a quick shout outs to people who are helping us. Wouter, who is doing all sorts of audio stuff for us. Thanks a lot, Wouter. And then Lubov, our designer, and Pizzeri, who is whose music we are abusing and basically copying and then not paying him. And one more thing is that Dutch Closure Day is going to happen on 21st of April. I'll be there and Ray will be there, and unfortunately all the tickets are sold out. So if you can bribe me, I can get you some tickets. But it's a free event. We have a very fantastic schedule. A lot of nice speakers coming over for spending a day in Amsterdam. I think we'll talk about it after the event. That's it from us. Ray, anything else that I missed?
Two more things. One is thanks again to all the people that put a few quid in there in our Patreon pot. It helps to keep the costs of the show all managed, which is fantastic. And also just a small, shout out to our apropos thing that we're doing on the video.
Yeah, that other thing.
People are actually, there's quite a lot of people joining in and enjoying that REPL experience. And so, if you're listening to this and you'd like to watch a few Clojure programmers fail live on YouTube, then we're doing that on a regular basis. So please join us.
So this is a Twitter apropos cast.
Apropos cast, yes.
Yeah. So follow that one. Of course, we'll put the links in the show notes.
Yeah.
So that's it for today. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Thank you.
And goodbye.
Bye now. I'm here.